Hello and welcome to Digital North. If you love Denzel Washington and you also love period piece family drama plays, which have been adapted to film, well, that's a difficult niche to satisfy, but we've got you covered today. I'm speaking, of course, of Fences, the 2016 drama, which is directed and starring Denzel Washington. I'm Ryan Hamilton. Joined with me today are David Nielsen, Thomas Harms, and Nathaniel Sand. This is Digital North. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me today. We almost have a full house, but of course Jonathan has failed us yet again. He's really been failing me since I met him.
He's a slave.
He is not
he's a slave to technology.
He said he's not here
slave
today
to Jobs.
because he has been fucked into the ground by Steve Jobs.
Which is ironic because Steve Jobs is in the ground.
In the ground.
I don't know. He seems like the kind of guy that would be cremated and like have his ashes spread in the ocean or something like that.
So it's the ghost
His
of Jobs.
ashes are probably in every Apple product.
You just have a couple.
Well, they're so expensive. There's a limited number of them.
Oh man.
Made with real jobs.
Well, I chose Fences. It was my choice this weekend, so I guess I'll kick it off. I knew nothing about this film before deciding that it would be the film that we watched. So I came in with pretty fresh eyes, and I'm pretty glad that I chose it because it was very different from most films that I've seen in the past. I actually didn't know that it was adapted from a play until the closing credits. And I had a hunch, and in fact, my girlfriend said, this is written like a play, because you have so many scenes that take place in one setting where like there would be like a group of three people, and like one leaves, and then as they exit, you'll have another enter. So you really have that kind of like play feel. So my question to you guys is, did you know that it was adapted from a play before seeing the movie?
Yes. I didn't even know there was I knew there was a play before I knew there was a movie, so yeah.
Huh? Like you knew of Fences before this 2016 Fences came out?
I'd heard of it as a play before I knew of the production that was the film, yes.
Are you very up to date on theater?
No, but I listen to some podcasts
about, like,
which reference theater.
Ever.
I don't know them. I don't know the actual plays themselves, but I have heard of them in the past. Especially the podcasts that I listen to tend to mention plays fairly often, and this is actually a very successful and notable play. So, yes, I did know that it was a theater production before it was a film.
Okay.
Nathan.
I also did.
Ha!
We sold it. I'm pretty sure we sold it on the campus store where I used to work, for some English classes. So I was aware of it being, but I didn't remember that when I started watching the film. And so the first time, as soon as like the first scene happened and Denzel Washington's character started talking, I'm like probably a play, and I'm like, oh yeah, it was a play, because the dialogue is so constant throughout. It's really driving, so I figured that it must have been.
Yeah, it really is.
But also
like they all of the story was told through dialogue instead of action, or at least the majority of it was, which was not characteristic of most film. This show don't tell, and that's kind of like a law of good writing, I guess. But for theater performances, dialogue just dominates it. Thomas, did you come into this film knowing that it was a theater production?
No, actually I did not, but now that Nate mentioned it, I do remember seeing that book in the bookstore. Just didn't really make the connection that it was a play. But yeah, like you said, the heavy dialogue carrying the story does make a lot of sense now, because I did have a few notes about that, how the dialogue is just so nuanced, and it just gives you a good feeling for the place and the atmosphere pretty well almost right away, but that it does make a lot of sense coming from an adaptation of a play.
Yeah, and I'm surprised that it was made in 2016. Like, I wonder what Denzel Washington's I guess inspiration was for doing it now, because it came out in 1985, and it also happened to win a Pulitzer Prize, which is pretty cool. It was written by August Williams, so I guess maybe it's a play that Denzel Washington has known about for the last 30 years, but it just seems like a interesting time to make this. I don't know. Did Denzel Washington direct any films before this one, or is this his debut?
Well, I think the reason that in 2010 he and Viola Davis, who is his wife Rose in the film, won a Tony Award for the performance of Fences in 2010.
So he performed it.
That's
on
probably
stage.
why. Yeah.
Oh.
And apparently, according to the intense research I've done on Wikipedia, August Wilson, who wrote the original play, did not want it to be adapted to film unless it was directed by a black director. And this finally was, they'd already had success with it, and Denzel is an incredible actor and artist. So it kind of seemed like a good time to do it. And I'm sure it was, I don't know if it was an indie film, but it was fairly low budget. So I'm guessing it was the right time and the right people that brought it together.
And sorry, to go back to my question, this is the third film that Denzel Washington has directed.
And do you know the other
What
two?
else?
Yeah, his debut was Antoine Fisher. And it's also directed and starring Denzel Washington. And then he also directed and starred in The Great Debaters.
Pretty self-important.
I've not heard of that
one.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of themes to talk about, and especially since this is a period piece set in, I mean, all of the actors are black. I mean, other than like the driver at the beginning and like maybe like a lawyer from the union.
Who's pictured in a rear view mirror.
Yeah.
Or no, a side mirror.
And so I guess the idea of civil rights and liberties and a just huge racial divide between whites and blacks is, of course, even if the movie isn't about that, it's going to feature it if if the characters are interacting in a public sphere at all. So I thought it was interesting that Denzel Washington's character. Well, let me back out a little bit. This debuted more than 30 years ago, and I thought that it was almost relatively stereotypical for how women's and men's roles are written. Because when I look at Rose is just such a virtuous character. Like, I mean, she's nothing but good, and her like only flaw is the fact that she loves and cares about her family too much, and the fact that like she gave too much of her rights up to be with Troy. And then so like it's really like she's a virtuous character who is battered and like put down by the circumstances that she's in, whereas Troy, Denzel Washington's character, is a flawed character who battles himself. And I think that's really common in a lot of writing for like women to be almost like the perfect character, and men to like have all the rights but like battle their inner demons. What do you guys think of the characters of Troy and Rose and of the time period that they find themselves in?
I'd agree with you. I don't think Rose. I think she's a perfect. In the context, we see a perfect person, essentially. I think the two things that they battle are Troy and racism, basically. Because Troy is making his own way, obviously, and doing far better than many African Americans did at the time. But he's also handicapped by racism. And according to him, who knows if it's true, obviously it's a work of fiction, but he would have been a star in athletics, and it wouldn't even been a point of discussion in the film. Well, yeah, no, it would. The play, the film wouldn't have been at all if he were white, essentially. Right. He would have been a star baseball player. There would be nothing to talk about. So I think that they're fighting against that, but they're also, because of that circumstance, they're fighting against who he is as a person, who is pretty bitter and knows that he worked his ass off and doesn't want anybody to achieve anything without working their ass off in a similar way. Like his sons.
Yeah. It definitely has the time period, right, with the relations of the wife being takes, the nurturing presence, the one in the kitchen, and they have those roles that are like, I guess, more traditional for the time. They do paint Viola Davis's character a little flat for a lot of the movie.
Say again. Sorry.
And she's kind of a flat character for a lot of the movie because she is just that role of like acquiescing and kind of giving in to Troy's kind of just talk. So when she finally does kind of towards the end, rather, satisfying for me. Because she's not a perfect character, because I guess on the one hand, she kind of is tied to the role that she's in now. She can't choose to just like Troy once she learned that Troy was having an affair. Because of the day and age, and also that she was a color back. She would have had even less options and less opportunity to dance than Troy. So, on the one hand, there's that, but on she does forgive him of certain things that I don't know if she should have. So I guess to go back at myself again, she does the line when she says, "I'll take care of your baby." You're like, you have a mother for your baby, but you don't have a woman. And I really like that line. Kind of her, finally taking a little bit of charge, I think. I don't know. I didn't say much, but that's my opinion.
I'm sorry, you were breaking up a fair amount during that, but I think from what you said, if I can reiterate, maybe you were saying that you think that she was mostly a flat character because she was just acquiescent for most of it, but the fact that she was also kind of a victim of circumstance, and that she was like married to just a domineering man in a time period where black women had far less mobility than most other people in the country, and it was just, but I
and like flat by design though.
I'm sorry.
I'd say
not flat, by design.
Flat by design. No, flat design. I'm not saying that character as a negative. I'm saying that it's more of she was a flat character because that's her life. Her life is flat like that. So yeah, I don't mean that as a criticism.
I know what you mean, because you oftentimes when you're telling a story, you need a baseline, somebody who's reasonable, who really understands the situation. And so many times during the film, she told Troy, "This is the way it is. This is your family. This is how you need to treat them. This is what you need to do." And so many times he wanted more, while at the same time denying that to other people. And that's just that's a character that you really need, somebody who actually knows what's happening. And as far as all the characters go, she was the most knowledgeable of all of them.
Yeah, well, I would agree that you at least need a foil, right? You need someone who at least has a perspective which is different than whoever your protagonist is or your co-protagonist.
So do you think that her perspective was right in the observer's view, or she was just the baseline?
From my point of view, I think Rose is almost a completely virtuous character. Like she's presented without any vices. She loves her family. She takes care of them. She is good to Troy all the time, and she makes him better because she stands up to him like when she needs to, decisively, and he has nothing but appreciation for her. So like no one interacts with her in a negative way. Like no one says.
Troy does.
Well, Troy
does. Yeah.
Troy cheats on her. That's right. But like whenever he's talking,
no, not
about
even
her
just
to
the
someone,
cheating. I don't even think that he's resentful of her.
He's resentful of her
In his personal dealings with her, just one-on-one. Yeah, absolutely.
Unpack that. What do you mean?
I mean, I don't have any particular quotes, but he's constantly, woman, I know what's best. I know what's best for me, and what's best for me is what's best for you because you depend on me. And
Sure.
he's constantly centered on, I've been doing so much work just to get myself to this place.
Yeah.
And he doesn't give her the appreciation she deserves.
Okay, sure. So Troy isn't a perfect character, and he doesn't necessarily treat her well. But like my point is that I think Rose is almost entirely virtuous character, and
I
she's
agree.
presented in almost an entirely positive light.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not saying that Troy hasn't misused her and hasn't, not been a very good husband to her. I just mean that
Sure.
I think that she, although Flat is kind of his foil, and I guess to answer your question, maybe I do think that she was kind of the voice of reason. She was somewhere between. I mean, because like Troy had some good points about his son. I mean, like playing American football in the 1950s, at a college. Most college athletes never go pro, and we know that like a lot of football players almost all football players have CTE, and we know that it's
Okay, well, that's another 50 years later. That's not something in their lifetimes they would consider.
It does make sense that Troy says, no, you've got to get grounded, you've got to make money for yourself because no one else will help you. And she, I guess, like the only point I could say that's like, maybe against her point of view is that she is okay with her son playing college football. But
yeah,
that's not necessarily a mark against her because she's just being a loving and supportive mom.
So,
But also-
Thomas, would you, I guess the way that she's represented and the way that their relationship works, do you have any input on that?
Yeah, I would say that their relationship is really representative of the dynamics of the time, with, like you guys have mentioned, with the kind of more patriarchal society where the man has a lot more influence in the relationships. And I do also think Nate had a really good point where Viola Davis's character really developed as it went on. I think the big turning point was that big dialogue where they talked about the cheating, and she finally stood up for herself and kind of painted the picture in Troy's mind of what her life is really like living with him, and how he was trying to make baseball analogies, being stuck on first base, and she's like, just get real here. Like, what the hell are you talking about? She stands up for herself, and I think that was one of my favorite points in the film. And I'd say their dynamic is probably the driving point in the film. Their back and forth, and finally his ending in his death, and their moving on was a pretty. I guess I didn't really expect it, but it was a really good ending to the film, especially with Corey coming home.
I totally agree with that.
It's really representative of the times, I feel.
It was a major turning point when she was subservient to when she kind of took the family power from him, knowing that he just wasn't capable of dealing with all of the issues, and that she was just, I mean, she had a family to take care of, and she didn't want him to continue. Obviously, she still needed him, but she couldn't allow him to continue on the path that he was apparently pursuing.
Yeah, and I think that was a good point where I think there's a good point in the film for their characters where throughout the play, or I guess I should say the movie, throughout in the movie, Troy is always talking about how he has to be responsible, and you have to have these responsibilities, and you have obligations to people, and he just kind of, I mean, he seems like a voice of reason, or at least like responsible, because he always talks about it, but I mean, Rose really steps up as a character when she says, like, yeah, I will take care of your daughter. Although, like, this is the third child that we've had in the home, and only one of them is mine. I will take care of this daughter as well.
Which one is her? It's the second
Corey.
one, right?
It's Corey, yeah, the football player.
The Marine, actually.
Thomas, are you playing the
Recorder?
Are you playing the recorder back there?
The slide flute. Slide whistle.
Slide flute. I don't know. Slide whistle sounds a little bit better than that.
That's his nose flute.
I have nose flute in my mind. I do. I thought it was weird though, regarding going back to Corey playing football and the mom being supportive. And Ryan, you were saying that it kind of makes sense why Troy's like, no, you gotta work and stuff. But Troy also at one point said, no, you gotta work and get an education so you can get yourself up. But playing college football would have allowed him to go to college.
Right. Yeah.
Like, and that's like he would have had that opportunity there.
See,
and
that's
so like
that's the racism part of it, where he just doesn't believe that any institution that was created by white people could actually, in the end, serve him or his family. Because that's the experience that he had himself in baseball. Even though he was very good at it, he never got anything out of it.
And that's interesting too, because if you consider the fact that he made a formal complaint against the union that he was a part of, the union which allowed white people to become drivers and black people to only be the people picking up the garbage cans. The union acquiesced to him, and they gave him the driving position. So I mean, he also has experience with an institution which can bend to his will, which is kind of an interesting point that I never thought of, because you're right. I mean, especially like in the 1950s, most institutions were completely against black people and like an institutionalized racist way. But he has evidence of times where there can be some progress which is made. So it's kind of interesting that he's not more optimistic about that.
I think that in particular is kind of up to the opinion of the writer, because there are so many different factors. Like, maybe he's writing this in because of an optimistic view of it? Well, I guess it was 85, so already he knew. But there were other ways to write that in. I guess, I don't know, at the time.
Well, so there's an interesting quote that someone, I think it was probably his son, made about, I think it was Leon, maybe, or Lion, or whatever, made about about his use of the word devil. He said something about, like, anything Troy doesn't doesn't know about, he calls the devil. And I want to find the quote specifically that I wrote. Maybe I can't, but he
wrote down by hand.
Like anything that is just bad for him, or anything he doesn't understand, he calls the devil. And so became like any form of like institution became the devil.
Well, when he revealed to Rose that he was a father of a child who was not hers, and then he screamed out the window, he screamed at the devil.
Well, yes, he screamed at the devil then. I mean, that was like, probably like the 20th,
but it was entirely. But in most other cases, the devil was something outside of his own control. In that instance, it was like his
adversity.
own.
Adversity is the devil in his eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever he faced adversity, it'd always be the devil that he faced.
And I thought there was an interesting moment when Troy was sawing wood and we're trying to saw the fence.
Sleeping, do you mean? Or
What's that?
actually signed? Was he sleeping?
Or just like getting ready. No. There's an interesting moment when he was sleeping. But they're talking about institutions and how Troy views institutions and institutionalized racism back then. And it's definitely, suggested many times that he believes that he could have, been better than all the players playing in the big leagues. He could have done better than even the players that were led in the league. And so, by the time this film takes place, he's obviously past his prime and he couldn't play in the league anymore. But Vitus's character, what's her name again in the movie?
Rose.
The Rose. Gosh, Rose's character, or the character Rose, mentions that he was too old. And that the reason that he didn't get into leagues was that he was too old. And so, I thought that was interesting because she did say that. And so, he always blames racism. But I don't know. I don't know where quite I'm going with that. Because on one hand,
same with you. Yeah, same with me. I don't know which it was.
I would take it a step farther and say that I don't think that he would have gotten into baseball if even if it were allowed, because if you look at it,
wasn't he a star of the Negro League?
He found baseball when he was already over 20 years old or 30 years old.
That doesn't matter.
In prison,
star baseball players, 35, you can be a star baseball player.
You can't begin as a star baseball player.
You can't begin then. But if you're
the thing.
Okay, so he went in when did he go in?
So I think
let's hash this out,
David. I think Rose said that you were 40. You were too old now. I don't know. I don't think that you would have made it, no matter what. You were 40. So I would almost contend that because we know that Troy is full of bullshit. He is constantly telling tall tales that are maybe sort of real but mostly not real for the entertainment of it, and it could have been that he has just really idealized himself as a player, and he's using it's the fact that he is his own worst enemy, he killed somebody, he stabbed somebody and went to prison for it. And then he just continues to be this character who's plagued by his own devils. And I think that the idea of him becoming a professional baseball player might not have ever been attainable.
I think that I don't think he's totally bullshit. He's the one person besides his second son who actually had a career, and he worked really hard for it, and he moved up in it. So he's not totally bullshit. And maybe before he was. If you take the things that he said at face value, if he could hit, what did he say, 360 or something, 420 or something like that.
But we do know that he tells stories that are just 100% false. Or, at the very least, complete tall tales. And we also know that the only other person who can vouch for his baseball playing ability is another inmate who he said attached to Troy so that he could, learn about the world. It makes the case for him being a potential player a little bit weaker.
Well,
baseball
he's still
also, all he has,
and also
of his
go ahead.
Self-worth in a way. No, sorry. It's just his conception of himself. I think one bright moment in his life he did have was this potential for baseball. He probably did have quite a talent, whether it was good enough or not to get into a big league. He had that talent. He had an ability. And so, Ryan, I would make a stronger case for what you're saying, because if that's what he has and thinking about himself in a positive light, he probably, remember it more rosily, because that's what he has to think about as glory, so to speak, right? Like,
Yeah.
And at the time, it's not like, I mean, he was African American, so it's not like he could have ever proved himself, regardless whether it was good or bad. The only person who would know that was himself, and there are no records. There's nothing like that. And he was in prison, so it's not. I mean, I'm not saying that he was good at baseball, but there's the chance that he could have been. And if he was, nobody would corroborate the story at all. And also, his son, who was a star football player, kind of bested him in combat, you know. And his son went on to be a Marine, which is no small feat. And the guy was, 50, 55, something like that. And
Yeah, but his son was a pussy.
Okay, we can get to that. I'm pretty sure he had a dick, but I'm not sure. I haven't seen his parents.
No, I think maybe that was supposed to be a point, because like we see his son as being like physically endowed. Like he's a football player, he's a star athlete, he's doing well. We see him lifting weights. But then we also see that like maybe he was stunted by his dad. And he said that he saw his dad as a shadow that
emotionally
was
maybe
weighing on him. I think
physically.
emotionally. I think not physically stunted. I think that he was like emotionally, just like too afraid of his dad, even if he was physically, superior to him at that point.
kind of, but he still played. He still chose to be like, I'm going to play football anyway. At that, like when he's swinging the ball hanging from the tree and the rose comes out. He's like, I'm going back to practice. I'm going to play anyway, even after Troy canceled the recruiter coming and canceled all that stuff. He did still stand up to his dad. It's just when they interacted in person, he did fall into the role of son still. I think that was hard for him to buck when they were that.
What's his name, by the way?
Corey?
Ricardo.
I think so,
second kid?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The one with Rose, yeah. Rose is
the one with Rose.
Blood child.
The only one with Rose.
Blood child. Mm-hmm. This is my blood
to me,
child.
it seems like Rose might be the instrumental parent of the successful child.
Mm-hmm.
Go on.
Lion was a guitar playing or something blues man, and the third was just a girl. So obviously, the second was the successful.
A young girl is important.
She was
but also a girl.
A child. She was just a girl, so she.
Thomas, do you have a view on how? Goodness, Corey, how his relationship with his father kind of represented the time-changing dynamic of the successful African American in that time.
Yeah, I would say it portrayed it pretty well. Definitely how he felt he was being held back, especially exemplified through the football, but like you said, emotionally as well. And I think Rose had a really good quote towards the end of the film about that shadow that he mentioned, and she said that it wasn't anything but you growing into yourself. You either got to grow into it or cut it down to fit, but that's all you got to make a life with. So that was her way of saying that even though he may not have been the best for you or give you the best life, you have to make the best of it. And I feel like he did finally come to terms with that towards the end of the film when he did agree to go to his father's funeral.
Yeah.
That's great insight.
And I also, like, David, to answer your question in a different way, like, it's a little bit troubling that a period piece set in the 1950s could have been a relevant, like, analogy for...
In the teens?
For how, like, black people were treated. Ooh...
I love the tune, but I feel like it might
back on that nose whistle or the slide whistle.
Slide whistle.
Not hearing this. I don't know what you guys are talking
Say again. Recap.
It's a little bit disappointing or a little bit frightening to realize that a a period piece from the 1950s, it was relevant was maybe true in some ways in 1985 and continues to be true in 2016. Like, I see this movie now and still see like, wow, yeah, there are, although maybe people of color in America aren't explicitly, kept down in the way that they are in this film, like the general analogy still rings true. And that's kind of something that's a little bit, that's kind of like the beauty. That's the beauty of a good piece of art, but it's also the tragedy of kind of a stagnating civil rights movement.
Well, I think the disturbing part is that we're having this discussion, but the people who don't agree with the values, and also the race component of it, they're not having that discussion. They're not watching the film. They're not looking at the history. They're not anything like that. And that is disturbing, and it's surprisingly prevalent.
Yeah. And it's the reason that we're still dealing with the issues in a way.
Yeah. 35 years after the writing of it, and 65 years after the 65 years after the events of the film.
Yeah, after it takes place. Yeah, and again, you could just kind of, most pieces of work are about struggle, right? And so you could paint a similar like plot structure with different specific adversarial points and like moments of inflection, and you could still have it like you could just adapt it to any people and any civilization, and you can make it work for their particular plight. But yeah, it is a little bit telling that like this specific plight is still true. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the role of like the adaptation itself. And
before we do that,
yeah, please,
real quick, just to point out, like, I know there's so many important points of the film, and I think, which might be controversial, I don't know, might be a minimal point to some people. I think race is actually pretty small in all of it.
Yeah.
And I know that it's obviously why Denzel's character Troy feels so inferior, and I think it's why what is the man's
Rose?
name? The Marine. Yeah, Rose and everybody. Why they have to do the things they have to do. I think it's, as far as the story goes, it really serves the story more than it does explain the nature of race relations at the time. Besides Troy himself, and I think there's a lot about culture and how males tended to dominate the culture, especially then. But I think that's more prevalent than the race relations.
Mm-hmm.
I would
agree with that.
Sorry, Nate, do you want to elaborate?
No, I agree with that. That while race relations are super like have a super large role of the underneath kind of undercurrents of the film, because that's one of the big reasons that Denzel's character is so frustrated, and then causing him to act the way he does. That's the back a lot of drama and the family dynamics that the film navigates through. Which is the main focus, Definitely.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a family drama, and because it's, as I said earlier, because it's set in 1950s America with a entirely all black cast, you can't help but have
exactly
like the societal racism be a part of it.
Which is not to diminish the societal racism, because it's definitely vital to the plot.
Yeah, but I also do think, again, like I said, I think it almost falls into like a common writing or like a common like character creation where it's always like
You have a main character with a major flaw who can't overcome it despite the supporting characters.
I would contend specifically what you have is a male character who is fighting his inner demons, and if you have a female counterpart, the female counterpart is mostly virtuous, if not almost entirely virtuous, and her biggest obstacle is her circumstances and her surroundings more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I don't have any data to back that up. That's just kind of a feeling that I have about most writing. Like it's almost like women are far and away more likely to be a virtuous voice of reason than men are.
I have personal experience to back that up, but
with the women in your life who have saved you from your inner demons
and have many, and other forms of saving me from demons, non-sexual, of course.
Non-sexual demons, not
but
like
great
demons,
position
like...
to put me in.
What positions do they usually put you in?
I set you up so hard for that. Oh my god. My goodness.
About the fact that it was a play.
So what you're saying, yeah.
Yeah, I thought I want to start by saying that I think that this film had some beautiful dialogue and some beautiful monologues, and there is a lot to be said about, societal struggle, about like personal growth, about gender equality, about racism, about your past coming back to haunt you, about outgrowing, the circumstances that you grew up in. But I almost feel like because it was so dialogue heavy and because there were like so many like poetic gems dropped per minute, like it was like 4 gems per minute, that I was almost overwhelmed by just the total volume of poetic expression that was in the film. And I thought it was so different from most films that I've seen, because, all films have dialogue, or most films have quite a bit of dialogue, but it was almost so much that part of the beauty of it was lost on me, because just the total volume was so high. Did you guys feel that way? Like, I'm sure there's some beautiful quotes that I just don't even remember.
Yes. So wait, Thomas, let's throw it to you. What did you feel was something you overlooked? Because there's just so much shit thrown at you.
Thomas, what don't you remember?
Something that I overlooked, I'm not even sure. I guess to kind of go along with Ryan, the excess of dialogue I would agree with, but I would feel that what really got me is the emotional intensity and the depth of the dialogue. Especially, I think that was something I also realized after the dialogue about the cheating, was that it was so emotionally heavy that it kind of needed some time to decompress after some of those one-on-one conversations, especially between Troy and Rose. And I think one of my favorite scenes was that right after that conversation about him having another baby with another woman, it was some really melancholy music and some kind of drab scenery and the changing of the seasons. And I think that was what made me realize that what this film was really going for was that it was truly a family drama. It was less about the racism of the time, though that did play a large part in the setting. That it was really focusing on the family and the depth of their relationship and the dynamics.
Yeah, that almost felt like an intermission to me. It almost felt like it was supposed to be like a palate cleanser to get you ready for like.
I'm sure it would have been an intermission if you'd have seen it in the theater.
Yeah, well, I agree though. I'm glad that you brought up that scene, because that was just such a. It was refreshing.
It was jarring. It was jarring, but it was like you knew it had to be going somewhere, and it felt like a natural fit for the characters. and the message of it.
Yeah, and it was also one of, like, there were maybe 4 sets or maybe 5 sets. And that was one of the only times that we got like a feel for the city. That was one of the only times, other than in the opening, that we had like them actually, or that we actually saw the city which they were in, and we actually like got a feel for what was going on around them instead of just like the backyard or the living room.
Yeah, up until that point, we were at that house and in the yard of that house. It was for the vast majority of the middle part of that movie. That's the only set that we had. So yeah, that scene nice. It took a step back and finally like went out of that area. To kind of go back, Ryan, to what you're saying about like dialogue, I thought it was interesting. Kind of, I guess, interesting that I thought to myself a couple of times during this movie that I didn't need to watch it. That I could close my eyes and just listen to this movie and still get pretty much the same like understanding of what's going on. You don't really need to see what they're doing as much. That being said, seeing what they're doing and seeing how the film is filmed and the actors' body language and the actors' facial expressions adds quite a bit, to understanding, how a character is processing some emotion or conveying some emotion. You didn't need to do that. If you you could close your eyes and just like get this film from just listening to it, essentially. Do you guys agree with that? Do you think how much, to what extent do you think it was necessary to have of course, it was necessary to have the images and stuff.
For pleasure, I think.
Yeah, for pleasure.
The images were necessary.
For pleasure. Well, I think a lot of the characters had some really interesting, like the body language is of course important in any sort of like human on human communication.
But like in the really like high emotion scenes, you could tell by their voice. You didn't really need because it was always confrontational, the body language. You could tell just by the voice that that's what they meant.
Yeah, but I think it helps, like when...
especially with Rose.
Yeah.
I mean, she's a wonderful actress. What's her name? Something Davis?
Viola Davis.
Viola Davis.
About Rose, or I guess Viola Davis specifically, the scene where just after Troy tells her that he's gonna be a dad to a new child, and then she goes out in the backyard and they have their big confrontation where she says, you always talk about what you give and what you can't give, but you also take things. Like they must have done that scene. They must have taken a few. The Tony Award winning play, they did that scene together many, many times. No, but okay, sure. Yeah, that makes sense. But they'd
worked it out
more than one take. Unless it was very unique.
I'm sure they took more than one take in every scene.
That's the point I'm trying to. That's the point I'm trying to make. So okay. I'm sure that they took more than one take, and I thought it was really interesting that they chose to keep rolling, although Viola Davis's nose was running so heavily. Like she had so much
that was
intentional coming out that like I thought it really. Like, it was a lot less glamorous than what you'd see in most films. I'm sure, like, most films would try to go with the take that made the actress look as beautiful as possible. But I thought there was such a, like, rawness to the way that her nose was running. It was so just unglamorous.
Yes.
And just so... it felt so raw and so personal in a way that I think that most films probably wouldn't have gone with. So I thought that was...
My suspicion, yeah, I think you're right. My suspicion is that they shot that in maybe a couple of takes, and they did it in the same kind of way, because the scene's only with the two of them, and they've already done that scene on stage with plenty of emotions, and they really know how to dial it in and really do it. And that's what you want, right? You want an actress who looks the part, who looks emotional, who's got nothing left when you finish that scene, and that's what she had. That's what she did. That's why they were so successful. That's why they're such successful actors. And they both really did an incredible job. Denzel Washington did so well as an actor. I haven't seen a performance like that in a very long time.
I agree with that. I was thinking that many times throughout this film. I find myself being like probably ultimately overly, but very very critical of acting a lot of the time, and especially having actors and actresses bring me into the world that I'm supposed to be inhabiting, whether it's a TV show or a movie or whatever it is. Just acting in general is it can be such a, I don't know, hard thing to believe, right? If
the fourth wall gets broken too much.
If I'm imagining myself thinking of these actors and actresses like in front of a camera, and that they're just they're acting, and so for films, especially like say The Martian is an example that comes to my mind. So much of that film is Matt Damon just acting the green screen, and he's not interacting
like
with
Matt
anything.
Damon, who's acting, yeah,
and so like that removes me in a uncomfortable way for how I like to engage with films and stuff. That removes me from it because I think of, well, this is not real. This is fake. It's a constant reminder that what's happening is fake. But where this film, the acting was so good, and I just thought that many times that the acting was so good that I was able to put myself into the characters' roles and to empathize and to feel emotions, and not question it a lot easier because of the acting. Yeah. I really like the acting in this film.
I think that's a good point. I think it's the acting, and I agree. Like, you could suspend disbelief really easily. And I also think the cinematography aids in that, because a lot of movies now will do a shot reshot where you have the camera focused on one person's face, and then it switches and it's to the other person's face, and there are cuts in the dialogue, and the dialogue comes from different angles, and like you can just see that there are like so many cuts in one dialogue. And
they're shooting one person and then they're shooting at another one in a different.
And they're shooting like over the shoulder, and like it's just like so much stuff going on. And in this film, you had like a scene takes place pretty much from one angle most of the time, and it's almost one continuous take. And that is pretty rare. Like that, you don't see that unless a director is purposefully doing it. That's not the mode which most movies are shot in. So I think that really helped me too.
Did you have an actor you thought did the best in that sort of style, or somebody who kind of like lacked, or you wouldn't have cast or something? I've got an idea of my own, but I'd like to hear what you think.
Is it the girl, David?
I would say for mine, my favorite would have been Rose's character. I think she played it the best. Being a 1950s housewife, but still having a strong personality that she did eventually let shine through, or I guess the writing did eventually let shine through. I would say my least favorite, I'm not too sure. I guess I didn't really have any too many negative quirks to any characters or any unpleasant scenes, in my opinion, so I guess I wouldn't really have one.
What about you, David?
Cool.
Who is your character that you didn't like as much as
I didn't love? I loved all the characters. I thought all the actors, as they were cast, did very well. What's the name of the second son, the Marine football player?
Corey.
I thought that if he were to be cast, a different actor were to be cast in his role, I might have felt differently about it. I thought he did a great job. But I don't know that I loved the matchup between the character and the actor. Just my position. I think he
I
did
think I know what
very
you're
well.
saying.
He was too happy.
He was a little tepid too. Like when he was like emotionally charged, it seemed like he was even a little bit reserved in a way that Rose and Troy weren't.
And his face was very soft. I mean that jokingly, but honestly too. Like he seemed like a child who didn't know the same kind of, like Denzel Washington. He could play any role. He could be the man who's been in a ditch for 27 years and dead for all of them.
He could be,
but not the actor who played Corey. Character. Oh yeah, like
Book of Eli.
If there were oh goddamn it, I was about to reference it before you said it. Yeah. The film changed too much had Corey been recasted, I think, like, is one way to put that. If you replace any actor with Denzel Washington instead of that role, very different film. Any other actress instead of Viola Davis's role, very different film. Even going down to like the role of whoever played Gabe, I think probably schizophrenic. By the way, you were the same guy who played Bubba in what's it called?
Forrest Gump.
Forrest
Gump. Bubba?
Oh. That was Bubba.
Bubba!
That was Bubba.
Oh,
Bubba's bad. But yeah, like he even looked enough like Denzel Washington at points to where like if you would have recast him, it could have been a little different feel. But Corey's character, he was more, you know,
incidental.
He wasn't a main character, so that also plays into it. But he, as an integral character, because he's still integral to different parts of the film, they could have recast. I don't know. He still did a good job with it, I think. But
he did. I think he did a very, very good job. It's just not. I mean, I don't know who they had try out for the role and stuff like that. I might have cast him. I don't know if I want to.
Nate,
say again?
Nate, I also think that Gabe probably had schizophrenia. That's what I diagnosed him with. Or like some schizotypal personality disorder. No. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, he heard and saw things that weren't there, and he had really
mental retardation. Significant mental retardation because of his.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. He did have part of his brain missing, and he had a metal plate in it. I forgot that. Yeah, it was an.
How did you forget that? They referenced it like 3 or 4 times. That's okay.
I was too distracted by Rose's.
Ryan, do you have? Could you go ahead and knock on your skull for me? See if you got a metal plate up there.
Metal plate.
I won't, because I don't play.
You won't
football
because you don't play the. Do you blow a trumpet very terribly?
He opened a gate to heaven. I don't think he could play a trumpet.
The clouds
better than
did
that.
part.
That's how that goes.
Nate, you know the Bible, and I guess David, you do too. Gabriel is an angel figure,
yes.
right?
Yeah.
He came to Moses, correct?
It's funny that you. My first reaction is saying, "You know the Bible." Is like, no, I don't. I don't know.
I thought about that connection too. By the way, I thought about that before you mentioned.
But yeah, no, Gabriel is an archangel.
Okay.
I don't know. I forget who he is to, but he's an archangel.
I want to say he comes to Moses. I feel like that's the one that I know. I could be totally wrong.
Because
it's like Michael, Ezekiel, Gabriel. I don't know.
Okay, because I think Gabe, Troy, and Rose have names for very specific. I think they have those names for very specific reasons, and I've been thinking about this a little bit today, because like roses are seen as kind of like a treasure or something to like be attained. They're seen as a symbol of status, and we do know that Troy like chose her.
Sorry. I was thinking Gabe brings her roses.
Well, Gabe also brings her roses, and that's
quite regularly. And he is from God, if that's his name. That's true.
Yeah. He's a angel who is like, you know, showing his grace on her, although they're not related. And he's afraid of Troy, and they are related. But anyway, I think Rose is really an appropriate name for her because she's like this beautiful symbol of status for Troy, and she's like something to be attained. But just like a rose, she has thorns, and she is very capable of rebuking something that she doesn't like, and she's very capable of trying to talk some sense into Troy. And I thought that was kind of cool. And Troy reminds me of the city of Troy, based off of the city was based off of the movie with Brad Pitt.
I think so.
The Trojan city of Troy, which was under siege from the Spartans, and so Troy seems like a character who's just like under siege by life, you know, like everything is coming at him, and he like feels like he needs to literally create a wall,
A fence.
a fence, a fence. Roll credits. So I thought that was kind of telling. Did you guys think that maybe they chose those names on purpose, or am I reading into this too much?
And Troy falls, right? Troy eventually falls. So
Yeah.
and he eventually. I think you can definitely put some. Well, as a writer myself, I definitely think about the names that I choose, and not every name. Like I don't buy into the super hyper text like analysis. Like every single choice means something in a book.
Uh-huh.
I don't agree with that, but I do think as an author, or as a playwright, August Wilson, right?
Williams.
August Williams. The playwright definitely chose the names deliberately. He didn't just just use whatever name they just pick out of a hat. Rose definitely has beautiful connotations, beautiful person. Roses also have thorns. Roses could wilt, as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's August Wilson. I think Gabe was intentional because, I don't remember all that much about the Bible, but I feel like Gabe is one of those angels who has a trumpet. Because I know that's a pretty significant trope in the Bible, that angels come with trumpets to greet people.
Oh,
especially
also,
when they're going up to St.
back up
Peter.
1 second. It is August Wilson. I'm sorry, Nate, you were correct, and David, you are correct. Sorry, angels have trumpets.
Yeah, so I was correct, right?
Yes.
Just so we're sure, yeah.
Yep. Very correct.
And I was too, right? I was also correct.
You
No,
guys
you
were
said-
both right. And
No, you
Thomas
said
is-
something else. You said like Williamson or something like that.
No, you said
I
Wilson.
said Wilson first,
said
and then
Wilson.
Williams because
And then,
Ryan
yeah,
said-
okay, yeah. And then I was just verifying your original assertion.
Thomas was also probably right.
Yeah, but we didn't hear what he said. Or at least I
He's
didn't.
probably right.
Thomas was dead wrong.
Aw.
Well, he may be dead, but he probably is right.
He is a ghost. Maybe.
Yes. We know that. I think Gabe certainly was intentional because of the trumpet and because of how just the stuff that he does in the play, especially at the end where he's the one who kind of calls Troy up to heaven. And I think that's a role of the angels, to be the trumpeters on their way to St. Peter. And he talks
thought it
about
was-
St. Peter all the time.
He does, and I think it's really interesting that Gabe said that when he died and went to heaven, he saw Troy's name in St.
The
Peter's book.
Who
Is
did
that
he not
foreshadowing for you guys?
Because he names other people that he saw, but there's somebody he didn't see.
He
Who's
said that he didn't see Rose in the book, but he's sure she's in it.
and he saw who else?
I don't know.
Because I remember
know,
he
but-
named like one or two other
He
people.
did mention, another person.
I'm unsure, but I thought it was really interesting that, early on, Gabe says that Troy is going to heaven, and then after Troy's gone, and after he kind of, has his fall, Rose still has that speech that she delivers to Corey, saying that, he might have not been the perfect man, but I believe he meant to do more good than harm, and I think that he was a good man. It's interesting the way that people
of the
remember.
film. Yeah, because like the way it seems like his death, gave Rose like finally or a sense of relief, a sense of finality, closure, and now she can remember things about him in a kind of nice light again. Remember the good things about him, and now because he doesn't have the potential to do any other harm. And I thought Viola Davis and the writing to that really well. At how she had that sense of peace almost and talked about him in a positive light, whereas while he was living at that point, he was essentially like dead to her. Yeah, I like that ending.
Yeah. Thomas, do you have feelings about biblical parallels or something else relating to this?
I guess not particularly going into it. And on my first watch, I didn't really pay enough attention to realize that the names could have been references. But now that you guys talk about it, I can definitely see the connection. But at the time, I didn't really give it a second thought.
So do you think that
are you
any...
well versed in the Bible? Are you a God?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Are you well versed in the Bible?
Particularly.
Do you fear God?
Do you fear God, Thomas?
Oh, but I fear Denzel.
I don't want to answer that question.
You fear Denzel. So do you think that Denzel represents God in this film?
That's a pretty loaded question. I'm not too sure about that.
If Denzel asked you to
In
sacrifice
the Old
your
Testament
firstborn, would you do it?
But
I mean, if it's lying, I think I would.
He's ghosting us.
He is ghosting us.
Oh,
He's ghosting us like Saint Gabriel.
damn.
He's calling
Let's
us
go
to
grab somebody
the...
to trumpet him to heaven.
If we hear some trumpets, we better run.
I actually thought I just heard some tone from him. It might have been a trumpet.
Might have been a trumpet.
There's a side
Alright.
whistle.
Sharp he was playing.
Let's get together our reviews. If we're all ready to give them, Nate Sand's video just went out.
No, it did not. Nate Sand is still here. David, your video is the one failing. We still see you, but your idea of what video is sucks.
I'm still
That's
here.
okay.
You don't even have a conceptualization of what video is.
And Thomas is here, correct?
Thomas is
I believe
always
so.
here. He's always around us.
She believes so, right? Yeah, okay.
He's not just
So we're
a
good.
ghost. I think
As long as
Thomas
I
is
can
probably
see
the
your
Holy
pretty
Ghost.
face, I can. I'll wait until the after show to say what I can do when I see your face.
All right, with that, David, why don't you give a wrap up?
All right. I'll give it a good 17 out of 20 iron baseballs hanging from a tree. I thought it was fantastic acting. I really loved the dialogue. The story was great. Direction was wonderful. The only thing I'd fault it for is that it was a play that was adapted for the screen.
Yeah, fuck theater, right?
Fuck theater. I mean, it was wonderful. I can't say anything bad about it, but it was. When I watch a movie, I kind of want something more than the movie. If I were to see Denzel and Viola Davis in theater, I'm sure I would give it a 10 out of 10. But right now, we'll give it a 17 out of 20 iron baseballs hanging from a tree.
I have a fun anecdote about German theater. I saw a German presentation of, I think, the Magic Flute. Is that a theater?
That's an opera. That's not theater.
Oh yeah,
I mean it's kind of theater.
the Magic Flute, yeah. I saw the opera, the Magic Flute, and blackface is alive and well in the Berlin theater.
You didn't know that? Oh yes, of course.
So like full on blackface plus
You should go to Denmark
plus
on
like
Christmas.
dreadlocks and like cornrows and like
Oh
nappy
my
hair
goodness
that they put on
gracious.
them. So
See, that part's offensive.
that's just
I
a
could go
nice
with a
anecdote.
false tan, but... Okay, do you want to give a rating, or should we toss it to...
Nate, what did you think?
I really enjoyed this film. a lot. I like the acting quite a bit. I thought the acting really allowed me to empathize with different characters we're dealing with. Just the failure and frustration that the Troy's character experiences and goes through, whether it's in his head or whether it's coming from an external source, is like conveyed super well. And the kind of super effect that has on his family and his life, I don't know, it's very compelling to watch. And that's the one danger I think this film had to watch out for, to just over wordiness, overly dialogued scenes. And there were scenes that the whole thing was pretty much just dialogue driven, except for that one little sequence of music. And so, yeah, my only criticism of this would be, I think it could probably be a little bit shorter. It never dragged for me, but there were points when we were at their house that I wanted to get out of their house. Like I wish that it would break that scene. But that's also a stylistic, and that's the choice of August Wilson, not Williams, made, right? Because that is their life. This is their life. That house, that yard, and that's where you're put. So I really enjoyed the film. I would rate it. I would rate it a solid 8.75.
It's got to be whole numbers, brother.
Whole numbers?
No, it doesn't.
Do the math.
No, it does not.
Yes, it does.
It definitely doesn't.
You're gosh darn
rate it a solid
multiply by 4.
875 out of 1,000.
Thousand what's?
This is hard. This is
envelopes of cash,
but I didn't prepare this.
Cash brought home. It's not bad.
Probably. How about trash cans dumped in a garbage truck?
There we go.
Okay.
There we go. I got
What are your final thoughts on Fences?
All right. Well, I would have to agree with everybody that the acting was fantastic. Being a period piece, like a 1950s African American family, I would say doesn't really hit too close to home for any of us, but it didn't really take away from our ability to relate to them and kind of connect with the family. And yeah, I would say it's definitely carried by the dynamics of that relationship, especially Rose and Troy and their 3 children of differing family status. But I would give it, let's see, 6 cheesy baseball analogies out of 8.
6 cheesy baseball analogies out of 8. Okay.
Okay, so what's
Not
that?
bad.
What's that number? We gotta translate all of these into like 0 through 1 or 0 through 10, so we can compare
Definitely don't.
what we do. I'll do the math.
I tried for the 10, but you didn't let me.
Well, that one's easy. You can just divide it by 100, and then you got 8.75 out of 10.
But you don't let decimals.
Which you should have just done that originally. I don't know why you didn't just call it 8.75 out of 10.
Wait a minute, that's you said.
Yeah.
Play this back.
Nate, just don't let him bully you like that. He's just testing you.
I'm gonna still play football, David.
Come at me, bro.
I don't care what you say to my coach.
I bought this house with my blood, my sweat.
Oh man,
You think
it's a good thing they didn't cast him.
I was about to make some racial reference, but then I realized I was white and that it wouldn't work.
It sounded like you were.
You could have done it in Germany.
John Travolta impersonation.
Yeah, I could pass as a Jew, right?
John Travolta Jewish?
Do I
Isn't
look
he
like John
Scientologist?
Travolta? Yeah. By the way, we should just say don't see a movie with the Scientologists because all that money goes to very, very bad things. Look into Scientology, Going Clear, or Leah Remini's. Been on A&E. What was your review, Ryan?
Well, I'm glad that you asked. I really enjoyed this piece of work. I think that it could go down similarly to how like Death of a Salesman has. It seems like it's just a timeless piece of art, and although hopefully race relations in America will change dramatically enough where it will seem a little bit alien to people in the future, the idea of man struggling against his inner demons and families struggling against circumstance is a timeless story, you know, and so it doesn't matter what the individual circumstances were. It's something which kind of resonates with everyone. I really liked it. I guess my only real criticism is just a stylistic one for me. I don't mind the length, but I did feel like it was almost too many beautiful lines.
Yeah.
too many ideas which they were conveying for me to really sink into any of them.
Without pushing the story in a different direction well enough.
And so I kind of feel that if there just weren't as many of those beautiful scenes of monologues and dialogues, that maybe some of them would be more impactful for me. It's almost, in some ways, I like to think of it as almost like the opposite presentation style of Louder Than Bombs, whereas Louder Than Bombs had so much just like visual stimuli and so many moments of like quiet where you just kind of introspected on what was going on. This was very much so like, this is what's happening, I'm going to tell you how I feel, this is what's going on, woman. Which is good, but you know, maybe that was its only fault that I really found. So I would like to give this film 7.5 trumpets out of 8 1/4 trumpets.
Okay, see, those aren't whole numbers. I'm going to
thank you,
refer
everybody,
you
for
to your
listening to
nearest
this week's
calculator.
episode of Digital North. It's been great. Bye-bye.